Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, Sharon, for your kind introduction. I'm always worried when people say nice things about you. They create a lot of expectations. And then you never know what could happen, especially on a rainy day like this. The situation in a state of flux, and I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what's going to happen next hour. I tried to buy a crystal ball on that Amazon, but I couldn't get one. So whatever I say is very tentative, and I'm the first one to acknowledge I may change my mind tomorrow. Having said that, my presentation is really going to be quite a bit long. It's divided into 5 parts. Part 1 is going to be about U.S. objective in the Middle East. The second part, a little bit about Egypt as a country. The third part, why I was not surprised about what happened in Egypt. And the fourth part, what's unique about the Egyptian uprising. And the fifth part is what are the implications of the Egyptian uprising to the US, to Israel, to the Arab world. And finally, what are some of the challenges the Egyptian uprising is facing? So we have a lot of things really to talk about. And if you are patient, God knows we'll keep you till 3 or 4 o'clock. Now, let's start with the most difficult part of it, which some of you may find it very difficult to swallow. And I'm going to be very blunt, and I'm going to be very plain about the US foreign policy in the Middle East. And I would like to suggest there are 3 guiding principles guiding the US foreign policy in the Middle East for the last 50 years or so. When I say guiding principle, I do not mean what Obama tells us publicly or what Bush tells us publicly. Did you hear what I'm saying? I'm talking about real politics. What we say in public something, and what we do behind the scene is something else. And that is what I'm going to emphasize, is that the 3 guiding principles. What are these 3 guiding principles? I'm going to start with the first one, which I don't think require any debate or challenges or dispute among all of you, is that first and foremost in our foreign policy is how to control the oil of the Middle East. Now that is easy said, but I want to explain to you why the oil of the Middle East is extremely important. You can say whatever you wanted to say, but the fact is, in the coming 10, 15, or 20 years, the Middle East oil is going to be the most important oil anywhere else in the world. Now, let me share with you 3 points or 4 points about the oil of the Middle East. If you look at the proven reserve of oil all over the world, it is approximately 1 trillion point 3 all over the world. This is oil had been discovered, and all what we need to do to lift it up from the ground. About 2/3 of that oil is located somewhere in the Middle East, which is approximately, if you translate that into numbers, is approximately 800 billion barrels of oil. Now let me give you an idea, what does this mean? Any of you know how many barrels of oil do we have in this country, proven reserve of oil in this country? And if you can guess, give me a guess. Give me a guess, come on guys, give me a guess. 5 billion, no, more? More? Is about 30 to 31, 32, give and take. Now, just to give you an idea, Saudi Arabia alone has approximately 260 billion barrels of proven reserve of oil. Iraq, which we invaded in the year 2003 because we want to liberate the Iraqi people, Guess how much oil they have officially? About 112 billion barrels of oil. That is almost 4 times the amount of what the US has. And all the geologists who study the Iraqi, who know a little bit about Iraq, they tell you Iraq is swimming with oil, including the city of Baghdad. So now that's one thing, they have plenty of oil. But guess what? This oil is very cheap to produce. It may cost about $3 or $4 on the average to produce a barrel of oil. How much it costs to produce a barrel of oil in this country? Any of you can guess? About 20 or more. It depends on which area, whether you talk about Alaska or Texas oil or California oil or. So it's all it depends. But there's something else which nobody wants to talk about, why the oil of the Middle East is important. It is important because the majority of the oil produced in the Middle East is available for export. Right now, they produce approximately 28, 29 million barrels of oil a day. About 20 million of it is available for export. Now, why it's available for export? Can you guess why it's available for export? Now, how do you measure development of any country? Now, the US consumes a lot of oil, and we consume about 20 to 21 million barrels of oil a day. And the average American in this country consumes about 22 barrels a year. Now, one way to measure a country, how much oil they consume. And the Middle East combined today, population-wise, is over 100 million people. It's more than the US. But they consume less than 9 million barrels a day. Imagine, just think about it. And I want you to think about it and feel comfortable about it. Imagine the Middle East is going to be developed. Tomorrow, the Middle East is going to be a highly developed area. And they're going to consume all the oil needed for their own domestic consumption. Do you think it is to our own interest to allow this country to develop? Did you hear what I'm saying? This is a very important philosophical point, that if Iraq is going to use all its oil, and Iran uses all its oil, and Saudi Arabia uses all its oil, and there's very little left for export, do you think it's to our own interest to allow this country to develop? Or let them fight with each other, there's constant tension and constant conflict, and let's divide them, and let's do whatever we can to do in the name of humanity and democracy. This is a very serious point, by the way, and I want you to consider it when we have questions and answer period. There's another reason why the oil of the Middle East is very important. Guess what? They produce a lot of gas. Did you hear what I'm saying? They produce a lot of natural gas. 41% of all the proven reserve of natural gas is located in the Middle East. Iran has the second largest proven reserve of gas, and Qatar has the third largest proven reserve of gas. And Libya full with gas, and Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. So that's point number one. Is really how to control the oil of the Middle East. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in the question and answer period. There's a second question, which some of you may disagree here, is to keep Israel superior in that neighborhood, to be a regional power in that neighborhood. How do we do that? We do it by military and economical aid. On the average, we give Israel about $3 to $4 billion a year. That's only the government, not the private contribution. We allow Israel to produce, to do all sorts of research, and to develop the latest kind of weapon on earth. And we recently contracted Israel to sell the latest military airplanes, F-35. And we allow Israel to do all sorts of things, including have nuclear bombs. Well, we don't allow any other country to do anything about that. They are son of a ditches if they do that. Did you hear what I'm saying? The third one, which is also some of you may disagree with me very violently, But be peaceful. I mean, if you disagree, throw your shoes, but not anything else. Anyhow, I happen to believe it is in the interest of the US to keep the Arab country in particular to be disunited. I happen to believe that the US in the past 30 or 20 years or 40 years, whatever it is, encouraged disunity among Arab countries. And we will fight and we will discourage any unity among these countries. And we'll do whatever we can to disunite these countries. In 1958, when Syria and Egypt became united under the term United Arab Republic, we did everything on earth to disunite these two countries. When Yemen, South and North, became united in 1990, in 1994 we supported a separatist movement, but that separatist movement didn't succeed. And I have a feeling Yemen is going to be disunited in the current crisis, but that's my own feeling. And by the way, before you jump on me, this is not only the official policy of the US, this is the official policy of Europe to discourage any unity. This is the official policy of Russia. This is the official policy of China. Why we try to discourage any unity among these countries? Imagine yourself if the whole Arab country become one. That's in theory. It's not going to happen for varieties of reasons, not only the US. There's about 320 million people living in that neighborhood. And that neighborhood controlled probably 60% of the proven reserve of oil. Do you want to deal with them as a united country, or do you want to deal with them as Qatar, which has a population of 700,000 people? Did you hear what I'm saying? So we can talk about it. I happen to believe the US in the 21st century is leading the role in redividing the Arab country further. The process of division started in 1916 with Sykes-Picot Agreement, when the French and the British divided the area into small mini-states. And I'll never forget my good friend, my distant cousin Churchill, Winston Churchill, when he pulled a pencil from his pocket, and he said, with this pen, I drew the map of Jordan. This is the man which we respect as one of the most distinguished politicians. But this is what he did in the Middle East and the Arab world, or what have you. We invaded Iraq in the year 2003, and what do we have now? Divided country practically, the north practically, for all practical purpose, separate from the south and the center. Sudan's already been divided. Somalia's already been divided. And very likely Yemen will be divided. And guess what? We have even a plan to divide Saudi Arabia in the future. Not today, but in the future. Before we invaded Iraq in the year 2003, Richard Perle, and if you heard about him, the neocon guy, he invited a guy from Rand Corporation to give a talk about Saudi Arabia, and in that talk, he had a roadmap how to divide Saudi Arabia into 3 mini-states. And the eastern section, the middle section, and the western section. So these are the 3 guiding principles: keeping Israel superior, controlling the oil, and then try to divide the Arab world. And by the way, there are other guiding principles, but we don't have the time to talk about all of them. So let's talk a little bit about Egypt, the subject of this talk. I'd like to say a few words about Egypt to put the discussion into perspective. And I'm going to cover about 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 short points, very short. Now, I gave you a map of Egypt. If you look at the map, it's really a big country. It is not a small country. To give you an idea, and I'm going to give you the approximate size, not the exact. If you want the exact, I have it in my notes. It's about 400,000 square miles. To give you an idea, what does this mean? 3 times the size of England, twice the size of Spain, or almost like Central America. Or to put it locally, it's the size of Texas and California. So it's a big country. The second point, but this bigness is very misleading. It's a huge misleading. If you look at the map, you are going to find out only 4% or 4.5% of the land of Egypt can be cultivated. And the rest is nothing but desert. And if you look at the map, it's basically a strip along the Nile. And a few oases in the west, and also along the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. And the tragedy too, out of this 4.5% of the cultivatable land, about 1.5% taken up by people like you and me. So there's not much room for expansion, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Those of you who are old enough to remember the Greek historian Herodotus, he said, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. He said it a long time ago. This is true then, true today, and true in the future. If you remove that Nile from Egypt, it's nothing but junk of desert. I will never forget in one of my flights to Egypt, during the day, most of the time I arrive at night, but one time I flew from Jordan to Egypt in the middle of the day, and it's nothing but desert, and all of a sudden you see the Nile, and then you see a lot of people along the bank of the Niles. So the third point is that Egypt population is unbelievable. Today, it's supposed to be 88 million. That is the unofficial number, by the way. The official, they may tell you 80 or 81 or 82, whatever it is. But look at it this way. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, or to use Bush terminology, when Napoleon liberated Egypt in, in 1798, the Egyptian population were 2 million. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was 7 million. In 1940, it was 20 million. In 1980, about 40 million, and today is 88. And all indication within 10, 15, 20 years will be over 100. And we are going to talk about this point later. What are some of the challenges facing Egypt? Point number 4 is that over 90% of that population are Muslims, but there is a sizable Christian community in Egypt called the Coptics. They happen to be one of the oldest Christian community on earth. And one of the disciples of Jesus, St. Mark, established that community. And the Egyptian Coptic community is one of the largest. It's the largest, not one of the largest Christian community in the Middle East. 6, Suez Canal is extremely important, not only strategically speaking, but for the economy of Egypt. About 3,500 ships go through that canal. 50 of them are full with oil. They go every day. They go to Europe, where it's consumed. Now, Egypt, that number 6, produces some oil, not much. It's an oil-producing country, but they have only about 4 billion barrels of proven reserve, so it's not that much. They produce about 600, 700, 800,000 barrels of oil a day. It's basically for domestic use. They used to export 200 or 300, but not anymore. But Egypt had discovered natural gas. They do have about 77 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. And now they are exporting it to Jordan, to Syria, and to Israel, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Tourism is extremely important in terms of the economy of Egypt. In the year 2000, they made about $4 billion of tourism, and there were about 5 million tourists in the year 2000. The expectation in the year 2010, there will be about 6 to 7 million tourists, and they may be making about $7 billion. And finally, and this is a point which I want you to remember, which is really very important, that Egypt has a large cadre of educated people. They have about 20 public universities, they have about 20 private universities, and they have many institutes of private higher educations. And they graduate every year hundreds of thousands of university graduates. And in many of my visits to Egypt, I have to use a taxi. I don't drive in Egypt, because if you drive, you have to be a nut, especially in Cairo. And most of the taxi drivers have college degree. And they were a very important source of information for me to talk about really what's going on in Egypt. And these are, by the way, these are university graduates. They are in thousands. Many of them, they have to wait years and years to find a job in the overblown Egyptian bureaucracy. And these are the people who made up the revolution, by the way, of January 15, 2011. Now let's talk about why I'm not surprised with what happened in Egypt. I wasn't honestly surprised, and I'll tell you why. Anybody who studied Egypt for the last 2 or 3 decades, even if you are a casual observer, I remember my daughter came with me in the year 2000, and she was wondering why nothing is happening in Egypt. Did you hear what I'm saying? And this is her first and last visit. And so when she heard about the uprising, she said, I didn't be surprised about what happened. She hadn't studied Egypt. So what do I mean? All what I'm saying, that if you study the economy and the politics of Egypt, you can tell. It's a barrel of oil needed to be ignited by a spark. And this spark came from Tunis, when the Tunisian people got rid of their president, and that spark ignited the barrel of oil in Egypt. So let's talk about the economical condition. Let's talk about a little bit about the political condition, and later on talk about the implication. The economy. The economy was in shambles. Officially, they tell you the unemployment is about 10%. But everybody who studied what does unemployment mean, they will tell you it's much more. It's like in this country, we said 9%, but in reality is more than 9%. You know what I'm saying? So when they say 10%, by the time you add the underemployed and the partly employed and the people who want to have a job, it will be about 20, 25, or even 30. 20% of the Egyptian people live under the poverty line. 1 out of 5 Egyptians live under the poverty line, which is $2, by the way. Cairo, the capital of Egypt, unofficially has a population maybe 18 or 19 or 20. About 3 million of them live under $1 a day. And I don't know how many of you have visited Cairo. And if you are a tourist, I don't know if they ever take you to the people who live between the tombs. And if you heard about them, the city of the dead, and there are millions. And the estimate could be between 1 to 2 million people living between the tombs. So that gives you an idea. The middle class in Egypt was shrinking. Once upon a time was very vibrant, very strong. But they start losing purchasing power, and they even shrunk in size. And the gap between the poor and the wealthy is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, like in this country, by the way, but not as bad as in this country. I mean, it's worse than what's happening in this country. This is what I meant. So you see about 10% of the people who are very, very wealthy, and they control the majority of the wealth. They have nothing to do with the large masses of people. Many of them, they live in a gated community, big swimming pool. They send their kids not to public school. All of them, they go to private schools, whether they're taught in English or French or whatever it is, and they have nothing to do with the masses. Globalization had ruined the Egyptian economy. I assume many of you had probably visited Egypt. How many of you have visited Egypt? Few. Good. Have you been in Khalili, the major traditional market? I went to go and buy Egyptian memento. When you buy them, you turn them around, made in China. I will never forget. If you don't believe me, come to my house. I was going to bring it with me, a demi-tasse set with Egyptian themes, made in China. So why did I should go to Egypt? I go to China to buy it. That's to give you an idea. The Egyptian economy until 1970 was government-controlled economy. And since 1970, it had been privatized. And all these privatization went to the cronies of Mubarak or his family, and on and on. In the last 5 years, by the way, and this is why, again, I'm not surprised, there were no less than 3,000 strikes and protests by the workers in the private sector, in the public sector, and in the government. What about the political scene? It's not different from the economical scene. Egypt, even today, by the way, with the uprising, is still ruled by emergency rule since 1980. Mubarak stayed in his job since 1981 when he assumed power. He manipulated the system and he kept re-electing himself day in and day out, a year in and year out, and all on and on. The election of the parliament was rigged. The last election of November 20th, year 2010, 95% of the seat won by the governing ruling party. The opposition party either did not participate or their participation was restricted. The prison system was full with thousands of people. They had been mistreated or been tortured, and there's a lot of story which you can read about them yourself. The Interior Ministry of Egypt, guess how many people work in it? 1.7 million. 1.7 million. Not all of them are intelligence, but 1.7 million. So that gives you an idea what's happening. The foreign policy of Egypt has alienated the Egyptian masses from their leaders. Mubarak became the lynchman for the US foreign policy. Without Mubarak, I would argue, some of you may disagree with me, that the US will never do what they did in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years in the Middle East without the active Mubarak support, including the bombing of Iraq in 1991. I'm not talking about the invasion, about 1991. And we'll talk about it if you are in the mood. So he became the spokesman for the US foreign policy, and that had alienated the Egyptian masses from Mubarak. His policy toward Israel and the way he supported Israel, right or wrong, it doesn't matter, especially with the sanction against Gaza. Without the Egyptian support, it will be a different story. The siege around Gaza will not be the way it was imposed in the war 3 years. And that policy had alienated, and I repeat that, the Egyptian masses. The invasion of Iraq had alienated the Egyptian masses from the Mubarak regime. So all these factors, I can talk about more if you wish, suggest to me that is a time bomb. It's just waiting to be exploded. That's really as simple as it. Now, what is unique about the Egyptian revolution? Well, there are a lot of things really unique about the Egyptian revolution. It's really, in a sense, is a rare event in the history of man and womankind. And there will be hundreds of thousands of articles about what happened in Egypt. There will be studies and books and books and books, and we'll find out more and more about it. But let me suggest to you a few general ideas about the uniqueness of the Egyptian revolution. The first one, which from my perspective, very interesting, is that the Egyptian revolution, as well as the Tunisian revolution, and the other uprising in the other part of the Arab world, destroyed the myth that the Arab mass don't count. The Arab street don't count. I mean, if you listen to the argument by the neocon and the embedded scholars like Fuad Ajami, they will tell you the Arab masses don't count, and the US foreign policy should not take them into account. I will never forget when Fuad Ajami, in response to a question from Biden, he was holding a hearing before the invasion of Iraq, and Biden asked him the question about the quote-unquote the Arab streets. Do you think we have to worry about it? He said, no, don't worry about that. When we invade Iraq, we'll be received with flowers and with roses and all this business, and the Arab cities is nothing but a myth. The Arab street is submissive. The Arab street is, it is very fatalistic, and the Arab street understands power, and the Arab street is very fearful and all this business. So the Tunisian and the Egyptian uprising destroyed that myth. The second point, which is interesting, the Egyptian revolution or the uprising is very indigenous uprising. It's not an uprising organized by the outsider. It's not by China, not by Russia, not by the CIA. It's a homegrown uprising. The third uniqueness about the Egyptian uprising is that what are their objectives? Freedom, dignity, and social justice. It's not only freedom, but they want social justice, which is very important. We have a tendency in this country, we talk about democracy, but we don't talk about justice. We don't talk about equality. We don't talk about reducing the gap between the wealthy and the unwealthy. The fourth point, the Egyptian uprising was peaceful and non-violent uprising. It is in the tradition of Mahatma Gandhi of India, in the tradition of Martin Luther King. They didn't use any weapon. They have no guns. They have nothing. As a matter of fact, the only guns was used by the other side, by the cronies of Mubarak, which led to the death of probably about 400 of and a few thousands of wounded. The Egyptian uprising was not limited to one part of Egypt. It's not only what you saw on television, Sahat al-Tahrir, the Liberation Square. It was in every part of Egypt, in Suez, in Ismailia, in Iskandariya, in Afyoum, and many, many other places. This was really a national uprising. Point number 6, this uprising started as a youth uprising. 20,000 of them on January 15, they marched in the Tahrir Square, but very soon it became a multi-generational uprising from all walks of life, all professions, all occupation, different generation, different gender, both men and women, and on and on. The Egyptian uprising in the beginning, and still is, leaderless. It started by many, many leaders, but none of them really has a national status. So the Egyptian uprising was not anchored around one important leader, like what happened in some other revolutions or some other uprising. The Egyptian uprising was also multi-religious uprising. It is not only Muslims. The Copts were part of it. And those of you who watch some of the satellites from Egypt, you saw the Muslim prayed on Friday, protected by the Christian, and the Christian prayed on Sunday, and protected by the Muslim, and they all shouted, "We are Egyptians." They didn't say we are Copts, they didn't say we are Muslim, they all shouted, "We are Egyptian." And finally, one of the other unique parts of the Egyptian uprising, the demonstrators were very well behaved and very well manners. There were not much female pinching or sexual harassment and all this business. Most of the people who participate in the uprising formed teams to clean up the Tahrir Square, or even to be in charge of protecting people from the government cronies. So these are some of the unique aspects of the Egyptian uprising. Now let's talk about the implications, so I can stop in a few minutes to answer some of your questions. Let's talk about implication to the US, implication to Israel, and implication to the Arab world, and God knows what else. Let's talk about implication to the US. It is very possible, but I cannot tell you definitely, that the US may lose a very, very important supporter for their policy in the Arab world and in the Middle East. It is very possible. But I cannot honestly argue for it. I say it's very, very possible. Whether this is going to happen sooner or later, I cannot tell you that, but it's not going to happen in the short run. In the short run, it's not going to happen. Why I say that? I say that because who are the people in charge of Egypt today? Many people are from the old regimes. And to be more exact, is the Council of the Military who is now in charge of Egypt. And who are the people who make that councils? They are all trained in this country. They are all supported by the military in this country. And this is the military of 1975 and up in Egypt. This is not the military of 1950 or 60 under Abdel Nasser or Nasser regime. This is the military under Sadat and under Mubarak. And we give approximately $1.3 billion military aid to Egypt. And all the weapons are made in this country, all the training are made in this country, and including the tear gas, which we used, by the way, against the uprisers. And I don't know how many of you watch Jon Stewart. I mean, I watch him and I watch Colbert so I can laugh, so I can go to bed after hearing all the bad news during the days. I will never forget, and you can check on me on that, the first week of the Egyptian uprising, Jon Stewart has Michael Mellon on his program. And he asked him about the Egyptian uprising, and I'm paraphrasing Michael. He said, the people in the armed forces in Egypt are our students. We train them in this country. We have an open dialogue with them. We talk to them almost every day. They know they can call us, and we told them we are ready to help you anytime you want. So these are the people who are now in charge of Egypt for the time being. And I don't think, and all of these people, by the way, they are not young. They are all in their late 60 or their 70, and you don't expect people in their 70 to reform themselves. You know what I'm saying? This is not, yeah. But anyhow, I happen to believe that the US may lose Egypt. Whether it's going to happen or not is still too early to tell, and we have to wait and see what is happening. On the other hand, I would say the following, and I'm willing to argue for it. I don't think the US from now on can count totally on Egypt to implement its policy in the Middle East. They cannot take Egypt for granted. In the past, they take it for granted. Whatever they say, Egypt will going to implement. I think now they have to be a little bit more sensitive to the Egyptian need and to the Egyptian people. We have to find out. Now, what about Israel? Here, there's something very interesting happening. I don't know how many of you heard about Netanyahu. The Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. If you read his articles and his books, he tells you the following, that democracy don't make war. Democracy don't make war. Only dictators make war. I never understood that idea. Democracy don't make war. We always make war ourselves here. But that's not the point. He said democracy don't make war. But yet, when the uprising took place in Egypt, he was confused, he was worried, he was puzzled, and he was quiet for a number of days. He didn't know what to do and what to say. And all what he was saying, what happened in Egypt may happen like what happened in Iran. That's his famous statement. Here is a guy who argued democracy don't make war. And here there's an attempt to have a democracy in Egypt. He is sad that one of his friends had left his job, Mubarak. And he's worried from now on that he no longer can negotiate only with Mubarak, but he has to negotiate with 88 million Egyptians. Well, that's what democracy is all about, right? That's point number one. The second thing about Israel is that I have the feeling that Egypt is going to open up the passage with Gaza. They are going to lift the siege against Gaza from their side. But they are going to do it very quietly without any fanfare. Point number three, I don't think any Egyptian government will cancel Camp David agreement. Did you hear what I'm saying? I don't think any government in Egypt, even if the Brotherhood of Islam became in charge of Egypt in the future, they will never cancel that agreement. Why and why not? We can talk about it. Two more things about Israel. There was a gas, Egypt selling gas to Israel, and there's a secret deal in the year 2008. We don't know really what is the detail of this deal because it's not transparent. But all what we know is what we heard about it, that Egypt is selling its natural gas 1/3 below the international market price. That deal is gone. It has to be renegotiated. If Israel wants to continue to receive gas from Egypt, they have to pay the normal price like anybody else. And the guy who made the deal, Hussein Fadl, or whatever his name, I forgot, he's now living in Dubai. And the last thing about Israel, and that is also an interesting point to make, is that Israel, since 1979, they want to normalize the relationship with Egypt. But that peace is a cold peace, it's not warm peace. There's no lovemaking going on between the two countries. I mean, for whatever reason, that normalization did not take place. The Egyptian people, for whatever reason, they rejected that. And I have a feeling that the dream of normalizing the relationship with Egypt in the short run is gone forever. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I don't know. In the long run, who cares? We are all dead. But in the short run, the situation will be different. What about implication to the Arab world? Well, Egypt is the largest Arab country. It has 88 million people. 1 out of 4 Arabs live in Egypt. So you can imagine. Not only that, there are about 6 to 8 million Egyptians live in the Arab countries. Those of you who are following the news about Libya, we were told there may be 1 million or 1.5 million living in Libya alone. There are about 4 or 5 million of them in the Gulf country and Saudi Arabia. Surprisingly, there's 500,000 Egyptians living in Jordan. And Jordan is a poor country, but there's 500,000 Egyptians. What do? They do everything on earth, cleaning the bathroom, to being doctors, professors, scholars, advisors to the king or to the president or whatever it is. Those of us who studied the educational system in the Arab country, the Egyptians played a very important role throughout the Arab countries. Once upon a time, they dominated the scene in the Gulf country. Even primary school teachers, many of them happened to be Egyptian, and on and on. So Egypt is not only heavy in terms of population, it's heavyweight. So what happened in Egypt is going to have implication to the Arab country. I mean, I don't know how many of you have been in Las Vegas. They say what goes on in Las Vegas, stay in Las Vegas. That's not the case with the uprising. What goes on in Egypt is going to have implication elsewhere in the Arab countries. We already seen what's going on in Yemen. We already seen what's going on in Libya, the tragedy in Libya. We already seen what's going on in Bahrain. We already seen many in Syria. Those of you who are watching what is going on in Syria, the situation in Lebanon, and on and on. So the Egyptian uprising is going to have a very, very important role to play. And one more point about Egypt and the Arab country. Egypt during Mubarak time, during Sadat, lost its role in Africa and in the Arab world. And they are going to do their best to regain that role. I mean, you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but Egypt practically did nothing in the last 2 or 3 decades in terms of their impact on other Arab country. So I'm assuming the new government will try to regain that important role in the Arab world and definitely also in the Middle East and also in Africa. And you are going to find out their role in Africa is extremely important, which was missing during the Mubarak regime, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Now, what are some of the challenges? Let me say only 2 or 3 important challenges. The phase 1 in the revolution is very simple. Everybody agreed. We want to get rid of the regime. But phase 2, 3, and 4 become more complicated. This is the time when people start disagreeing with each other. You know what I'm saying? But what are some of the challenges? And I would like to mention 3 or 4. There are more than 3 or 4. And then I'll stop because almost 2:20. Oh, it is already 2:20. The first important challenge is, from my perspective as a sociologist, is population of Egypt. Until and unless Egypt can control its population, probably Egypt is doomed. The population is growing very, very fast. 2/3 of that population under 30, 50% of that population under 20. So it's a very young population. I will never forget when I was still in Iraq, and at that time Egypt has President Nasser, and in one of his speeches, still ringing in my head, he said that we are building 3 schools every 2 days, and we are not keeping up with the growth of population. And at that time, the Egyptian population was 25 million. Did you hear what I'm saying? So the growth of the Egyptian population is a serious problem. How this government is going to channel its effort to keep the growth as minimum, it's a very interesting point, and we can talk about it. The second interesting challenge is how to create jobs. I mean, jobs is very difficult to create. I mean, as I told you, thousands and thousands of people are graduating every year with college degree. Many of them, they have to wait 2 or 3 years to get a job in the Egyptian bureaucracy, which may make $50 or $100 a month. How can you survive on $50 or $100 a month or something of this sort? I mean, I told you most of the taxi drivers have a college degree because many of them, this is their second job besides the job in the government. And when you study the Egyptian bureaucracy, it's overblown. For each job, they may have 5 people to do the job. Not because there are so many people and they want to absorb them, and that's as simple as that. So the challenge to create jobs, to keep pace with the population. The other challenge is the Nile River. Did you hear what I'm saying? The Nile River. This poor river, which we call the Nile, used to feed only 2 million Egyptians in 1798 when Napoleon invaded Egypt. The same river has to feed 88 million Egyptians today and more than 100 million Egyptians in the coming years. And the same river, how many countries are on that river? 7. And including Sudan and the southern Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, and on, and they all depend on the Nile River. And in the near future, there's a lot of talk that Ethiopia, in particular, may start building dams. And if they start building dams, that means the amount of water from the Nile River to Egypt will be much less than what they receive today. And this is why it's very important to Egypt to reinvent themselves in Africa, to start playing an important role in Africa and start having serious relationship with these countries, especially around the Nile, because this is going to be a very, very serious problem. The other problem is feeding the Egyptians, how to produce food. I mean, once upon a time, Egypt was self-sufficient, but now they import a lot of food from abroad, including wheat. They used to import them from this country, from Russia, or from somewhere else. So these are some of the challenges which the new government are really facing. They are not simple challenges. They are very, very difficult, and I'm not going to be envious of them to be in their job. Well, let's be fair also to Egypt. A long time ago, they didn't care about family planning, but I think since 1980, they are very serious about family planning, in all fairness to the Egyptian government. And all the study which I'm aware of, for example, in the past, the average number of children per Egyptian family was about 5 or 6 in the 50s and the 60s. Today, on the average, there are 3. So there's quite a bit of change in the size of the Egyptian family. But the problem with Egypt, they have a very young base. And you have to deal radically with the young base of the Egyptian population. I happen to believe in the Chinese method. Did you hear what I'm saying? I happen to believe in the Chinese method, but I'm willing to modify the Chinese method. The Chinese method says 1 child per family if you are living in the city. But I am willing to go along with the idea that 2 children per family, and then we establish what I call incentive and disincentive. If you have more than 2 children, then you lose certain privileges, maybe sending your kids to schools or hospital or. And by the way, this system had been adopted by Iran, surprisingly, in the 90s, and apparently is working. Apparently is working because the Iranian population, once upon a time, the fastest growing population in the Middle East, but now it's slowing down quite a bit compared to the other population. So I agree with you, we have to be sensitive. But there's another interesting point which I would like to share with you if you are in the mood. There's a country by the name Indonesia. It has a population of more than 200 million people. They did something very interesting, which I thought was very clever. That the majority of the people in Indonesia happen to be Muslims. There is where the sensitivity. You have to be sensitive to their religion. Guess what they did? If you are going to be an imam of any mosque, you have to take a 2 or 3 week seminar on family planning. And you are supposed to convey whatever you learn to their audience, because the audience are a captive audience. When you go to the mosque, you may have 500 people listening to you. They don't have the right to question you, they listen only. So this way you can convey messages about family planning, and this way you can probably change the mind of many people about family planning, because the biggest obstacle in Egypt and many other countries is that is Islam for family planning or not? I happen to believe yes, but there are many people who disagree with me. Well, yeah, that's a big problem, by the way. That's a huge problem. I was listening to a number of commentators on the Egyptian channels, and they brought many professors or teachers or experts on constitutional law. And practically all of them, with no exception, they say no to what happened yesterday. And their rationale, it's too early, number one. And number two is that by voting yes on this amendment, in a sense, you are bringing back the old constitution into reality. So today, based on the result, and by the way, I didn't follow them in detail, but I know it's passed, and which means that now Egypt is ruled by the old constitution with a few amendments. And that's not, by the way, one of the goals of the uprising. So what may happen in the coming few weeks or months, God knows. So there will be a lot of confusion. I was listening to one of the professors, and he said the following. I have no idea, I didn't follow the point, but this is what he said. He said, if the vote is yes, then the new constitution back into operation, and therefore the military council is illegal. Because there's nothing in the constitution about the council of the military council. You see the problem now? So we have an interesting dilemma. How is it going to be resolved? I'm waiting. So I'm waiting. So there's another thing which, in all fairness, which you have to keep in mind. The Egyptian revolution is only a month and a week. So it's still too early to tell what is happening. I mean, those of us who study the French Revolution or the American Revolution, you talk about years and years, and how phase one different from phase two, phase three, phase four, and on and on and on. So we are still trying to understand really what is happening. If you are worried about peace with Israel, I would say the answer to that, don't worry about it. Did you hear what I'm saying? I don't think you need to worry about Camp David. But the peace is going to be called peace. It's not going to be a warm peace. It was called then, it's called now, it's going to be called in the future in the coming few years. I don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now. Now, my second point, the Brotherhood of Islam, like all organizations, they started as monolithic and then they move in different directions. But the one today, you are going to find out when you read their statement, they will tell you very clearly, we are not for a Muslim government. They tell you we are not for a Muslim government. But Mubarak, if you remember what he said, if you don't want me, there will be the Brotherhood of Islam will be in charge, and then you are going to have a Muslim government. But the Brotherhood bluntly said it, that we are not in charge. We do not want to have a Muslim government. We want to have a government where everybody can participate in equally and on and on. The third point which I wanted to make, don't get scared from them. Did you hear what I'm saying? Don't get scared from them, and don't exclude them from the political process. From my position as a sociologist, if you exclude them from the political process, you are encouraging them to be an extremist. Extremism is a product of exclusion. And that's what happened in my judgment with Hamas. Have we accepted Hamas and we negotiate with Hamas and we talk to them, you could have changed their mind. I can assure you, people change their mind. I change my mind, you change my mind, people change their mind, and on and on. So all what I'm trying to say, don't get scared of them. Let them participate. By all account, they may be maybe 1/5 of the Egyptian voters. In the last election they participated in the year 2005, they got about 88 seats, if I remember. And that's only 1/5. So 1/5 does not mean all Egypt. That's as simple as that. But again, my advice to all of us, and including myself, do not exclude anybody from the political process. Exclusion means extremism. That's the way I look at it. Let me answer the second one first. I don't think there will be any change in American foreign policy in the near future. I don't see any signs for that. We thought Obama would do that, but the answer to that is no. The way I listen to Obama, as if he's Bush, almost, the way he talked on occasions. The second point, I don't think we'll leave the Middle East voluntarily. We have approximately 270,000 soldiers, militaries, not mentioning the civilians. We found out there is about 60 or 70,000 American civilians in Egypt during the uprising. But the figure which I'm aware of, there are 270,000 soldiers in the Middle East. There are bases in Kuwait, bases in Iraq, bases in Qatar, bases in Bahrain, bases in United Arab Emirates, and bases in Saudi Arabia, which they don't tell us anything about it, and they are everywhere. And we are not going to leave that area willingly, unless if we are forced to. Let me give you an example. One of the reasons we hate Gaddafi, and Gaddafi is son of a ditch, and I will never defend him, but guess what he did to us in 1970? The first thing he did, he kicked out the American bases from Libya. One of the largest American bases in North Africa, wheelers bases. So I don't think this is a dream. I'd like to dream with you that we are going to leave. I'd like to dream with you that we are going to change our policy. But I don't see any indication we are moving in that direction. Well, I mean, WikiLeaks are very, very important leaks. And I think it told us what we already know about what is going on. I mean, many of what we heard and what we learned about WikiLeaks, it's been confirming rumors, which we really know about the attitude of the Arab government toward what is happening, whether it is toward American foreign policy or toward Israel or anything else. So these leaks came to confirm. It came to confirm that these leaders are corrupt. It came to confirm that all these leaders, they have nothing to do with their people. It came to confirm that the country is nothing but a fiefdom for them and all this business. So what I'm trying to say, in that sense, they were very, very important. In the past, we say these are rumors, but now we know they are facts. And that's really as simple as that. When we found out that the wife of the president of Tunisia, the former, and how much she owned and her cronies, etc. I mean, if you talk to a Tunisian, they tell you these things. But the Weekly confirm it, and that's really as simple as that. So in that sense, they were very, very important. And this is why the US government were very embarrassed, because it came from their mouth, not from unconfirmed report. And that's as simple as that. So definitely, I'm against what we are doing to that soldier. From my standpoint, we should be proud of him and we should do whatever we can to defend him. I mean, without this kind of information, democracy is not going to flourish. We need to have that for the sake of democracy, by the way, in this country. Because transparency is an important element of democracy, and what we are doing is not very transparent. That's as simple as that. I tell you, the US can do a lot of things if we don't put strings to what we do in Egypt. You know what I'm saying? We have a lot of technical experts, we have a lot of expertise, and we can lend support to the Egyptian. The Egyptian, they have a lot of talented people, and if we put these two talents together, they can do wonder. I mean, remember, the questions of food related to water. The question, how can you secure water? How can you increase the amount of water? I mean, the desert, there's nothing wrong with that desert. The only problem, there is no water. If you can bring water to the desert, probably you can create miracles. So I guess the Egyptian talent and the American talent, if they are put together, they can help in terms of increasing the production of food. You see, the question of the Shia and the Sunni in Egypt doesn't really exist that much, because the majority of the Muslims in Egypt happen to be Sunni Muslims. And there may be a few Shia Muslims. I cannot tell you their percent, maybe less than even 1% of the Muslims. So that issue honestly doesn't exist. It exists in countries like Bahrain, it exists in countries like Iraq, it exists a little bit in a country like Saudi Arabia. But in Egypt, to my knowledge, the Shia population is a very small percent. So in that sense, really doesn't exist. I have no idea. I cannot be in their mind or in their soul. But let's put it this way, and you may agree with me or disagree. Even if they use the word human, they don't mean it. I happen to believe these are code words, and we use it to justify our behavior in the Middle East and somewhere else. And that's really as simple as that. But that's also reminded me of the old colonial period, when people, they used to go in Africa or in the Middle East, and they say, we came to civilize you. So now we came to make you a democracy by bombing the hell out of you. And that's what we are doing in Libya, and this is what we are doing somewhere else. So whether they use it or not, really they don't mean it anyhow. But do you have an answer to that? You may have an answer. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.